Hello students, welcome to Mahamana Academy. Yesterday we have discussed the chapter Cold War and today we are going to discuss end of bipolarity. So when we were discussing about world politics, we have discussed that how after the World War II there was a two world in the sense that on one side there was a USA and on the other side USSR, right? So USA and USSR. And we have discussed how the ideology was different, how the system was different, right? So basically the Western countries, they have supported the USA Western allies and the Eastern allies have supported the USSR. Okay, and then the USSR has their ideology in socialism and they have followed the capitalism, right? And also there was a communist system and here there was a democratic system, right? So we have discussed this in first chapter, and then when we are talking about the end of bipolarity, so that means that this structure, this bipolarity structure, this has somehow ended. But how it ended, what happened, we are going to discuss in this chapter, right? Coming to this slide, first of all, the one thing important in this slide is the Berlin Wall, okay? What was Berlin Wall? So basically, the Berlin Wall shows that rivalry between the USA and USSR, because we have discussed how the Western allies and the Eastern allies have their mind clear that the Western allies were following and supporting the USA and the Eastern allies were supporting the USSR. So what happened basically, during 1948, the USSR had made this Berlin blockade, right? 1948, there was a Berlin blockade by the USSR. And why it happens? Because the most of the people were going to the area of the Western allies, right? So they just made that wall to separate that Western and Eastern region, right? So basically this wall was created. But now what happening in 1989 and so on in 1990 is that this Berlin Wall, that was also fall down, right? So it shows that now the rivalry has somehow ended because that wall which was differentiating two regions, that was fall down, right? So in 1989, this is very important from your MCQ point of view, 1989. Okay, so when the Berlin blockade, 1948, and when it was fall down, 1989, right? And then when Germany unified, because this Berlin blockade was of the Berlin Wall was in the Germany, right? And that has separated the Eastern Germany and the Western Germany. So basically it was in the Germany. So when this Berlin Wall was fall down, the Germany was unified in 1990. And now it shows that there is no longer two superpower, right? And this shows the end of bipolarity. So from your MCQ point of view, these three dates are important, right? Okay, coming to the preceding things. Now we have to discuss the second world. This is also important, right? So we have discussed USA, USSR, right? The two superpower. So USA we consider the first world, USSR as the second world, right? And the emerging countries, like for example India and other countries which recently got independence, they are the third world countries. So it's basically a term which we have used during the Cold War period, and that's why we have discussed here also. I'm just pointing specific words and dates just for the MCQ's purpose, right? So you should have that clarity ki what was Second World War, right? And then this happened. Okay, so coming to the next slide. So now in this slide we are just discussing that what we are going to discuss in this chapter. So basically what we are going to discuss, what was USSR, right? What was the bipolarity system, how and why it was disintegrated, the USSR disintegrated, and then we will also discuss some of the consequences of that disintegration, right? And then we will also discuss how it impacted the India also, right? it impacted the India in the sense that how after the disintegration India is maintaining its relation with the Russia and the other communist bloc, right? Okay. So when we are going to discuss the end of bipolarity, first we have to study about bipolarity system, right? So basically when we are not discussing USA here. In the next chapter we are going to discuss how, after the end of bipolarity or after the disintegration of USSR, the unipolar world evolved, right? So in that chapter we are going to discuss about the USA, right? But here right now we are discussing about the system and the financial system, everything of USSR, right? So basically USSR, how it evolved, if we see the chronology, from the Russian Revolution 1917, and then after 1945, okay, after 1945 or after the World War II, the USSR became the powerful, right? And then we have discussed the 1948 Berlin blockade, right? So this shows the chronology how, the USSR was emerging like USA, right? And then we have discussed in the last chapter also that how, the East European countries, okay, so East European countries was in the side of USSR and the West European countries was in the side of USA, right? And it is because the USSR have helped them, right, in the form of freeing them from fascist forces. So what is fascist forces? What happened after this First World War, right? Let me just clean it first. So what happened, if you see the chronology, First World War, right, and then there was a period when the Nazis, fascist, this regime was very much highlighted, or they, the Hitler and the Nazi, they were dominating the Germany, Italy, right? And their atrocity was very violent, right? So basically this period from World War First to World War II, there was a period of Nazi fascists, right? So USSR also helped the European countries to come out of that, right? So that was also one reason. The other reason was that there was the alliance system we have discussed in the last chapter. So that's why some countries favored the USA and some favored the USSR. So in this way, the Eastern European countries were in the side of USSR, right? So, basically we have also discussed about the economic and political system, right? So if you see the USA and here the USSR, the economic and political system was very different. Here we have democratic system, right? Democratic system. Here we have communist system, right? This is the political system. And then in terms of economy, USA adopted the capitalist economy and USSR adopted socialist economy, right? So in this way we can see that how, the political and economic system of USSR was communist and socialist, right? And then we have, and then we will go forward and we will discuss what happened in this particular regime. So I'm just going to clean it and we will just discuss about the USSR, right? So what is communist system and what is socialist system, right? So when we are talking about the socialist system, right? Socialist system is basically when there is no competition, when then all the healthcare facilities, all the basic facilities is provided by the government, right? So government, basically what happened in socialist system, that government basically ask you to work and they take your money and they will manage how, the facilities to be allocated, right? So basically in the capitalist system, what happened is on the merit wise, on your ability, you get the job, you get the income, and then you spend accordingly. But in the socialist system, there is a centralized system. Centralized system in the means that everyone is, having their income and then they are giving it to the center, right? Center, basically the Communist Party members, right? The powerful people of Communist Party, they are managing how to allocate that. So basically if we see the the facilities like health, education, childcare. So these are on the very subsidized nature. Let me just clarify you. I will try to relate it to the Indian context, right? So basically, let's just see Indian context, right? We have capitalist plus socialist system. We have mixed economy, right? I'm just telling you the context of India just to have that understanding ki what is capitalist or what is socialist, right? So if you're talking about the India has adopted socialist plus capitalist, right? So it means that the key industries are in the hand of center, are in the hand of government, but the other industries can run accordingly, right, according to their merit, according to their competition, because we have mixed system. So in the socialist system, so basically if you see in India, we have some competitive, like we have private sector also, right? The people are going through by merit, or they are doing on a competition basis. So we have private sector that shows the capitalist side, that private sector. But then we have also the government sector, right? We have government sector in the sense that we have key industries, right? Many of the people, most of the people are working as a government employee, right? So that system, right? That security, right? Security, the sense of health, right? If someone is working in a government sector, they also get some facilities like health, education, and everything. So that particular people are in the, government sector, and they are somehow getting this benefit through the socialist system, right? So when we have adopted capitalist plus socialist, we have this both thing, private plus public. But in the USSR, imagine there was only public sector, right? No one can have their own industry, no one can compete in that way. Everything is in the hand of Communist Party people, right? So basically everything is in the hand of government, and then government, according to their decision, according to their concise, allocate these facilities on the subsidized basis. What is subsidized basis? It like for example, we have some hospitals like AIMS and BHU. So this basically what happened, that in these hospitals we get the medical facilities on very low rate, right? We have to pay very less, right? So that is the subsidized. Subsidized means the concession, right? So whatever you are paying, concession on that. So that is the subsidized way. So in socialist system, there is a system when everything is get controlled by the government, and then they are giving that according to their own concise through the subsidized system, right? And coming and you know what happened, this we have discussed the economic structure, and then coming to the political structure. Soviet system, somehow, because there was no system of election per head, right? Election in the sense that like in USA, the president elected after every 4 years. But in the case of USSR, it somehow the same people was, the same communist people are in the top position, and they are somehow ruling the government for many times. So when government rules for many times, for many years, that happened, that the government become bureaucratic, authoritative, and lack of democracy, right? So freedom of speech was curtailed, right? So basically if you see, let me just highlight it. What happened? We have discussed the economic structure and the political structure. It become bureaucratic, it become authoritative, right? There was lack of democracy and the absence of freedom of speech, right? So this was the case of USSR, right? And discussing more about it, one thing which is the very much limitation of the USSR system is that we will see the map in the next slide, and we will realize that there are many states in the USSR, right? But the Russia is having the largest region per se, right? So because of that reason, Russia somehow dominated entire USSR. So on paper there was 15 countries, but somehow on practice the Russia was dominating the USSR system, right? And also, so basically, if you see that the structure of USSR, the USSR government or the political structure was designed in such a way that they were not somehow satisfying the people of the country, right? So people were somehow not happy with that system because it was authoritative. There was no competition in terms of in terms of economic structure, and there was also lack of democracy, lack of freedom of speech. So this was the USSR at that time, right? Because when we have discussed the socialist system, right? So socialist system is the economic system, but when socialist system become more extreme, right? Only the few people are having that power. So that system become the communist, right? Only the communist party, the people belonging to that communist party, they have the say, and they can have the election, they can rule the government. So the structure was also very, very confined, right? Not everyone has that facility to contest election and have the part in the ruling, right? And then, if we see the Cold War phase, right? So Cold War phase, we have discussed this, that, there was a phase that there was first Cold War period, and then so basically when we see the Cold War period, we can divide that period into some phases, right? And we have discussed this in first chapter as well. So basically first the Cold War, right? Cold War, we can say it was, till 1961. Right, and then the detente. What was detente? So it was basically somehow the end of that rivalry in a way, or it has softened. The rivalry was softened somehow. But what happened in 1979? That the other phase, the Cold War second, happened. It is because the Soviet Union invaded the Afghanistan, right? So basically, when Soviet Union invaded the Afghanistan, it has also weakened the USSR economic or political structure as well, right? Because if someone is attacking someone or making invasion, so there is a consequences on your system as well, right? So you will face that in terms of financial or economic structure as well. So that happened in 1979. So somehow you can see that chronology, that how the USSR is somehow, the system of USSR was somehow not satisfying the people, and also there was some events were there that that helped that system to that helped the chronology to finally collapse, and then the disintegration of USSR, right? So these are the reasons we are going to discuss in the next slide, right? Okay, so then we have also some reasons, like for example the Gorbachev. So basically we will read about the Gorbachev. He was also the leader of communist, he was the leader of USSR at the time when the USSR was about to disintegrate, right? So somehow people also consider Mikhail Gorbachev as one of the reason of disintegration of USSR, because the USSR system was already dissatisfying, right? And somehow Mikhail Gorbachev, he made some attempt to reform that system, right? But his way of doing that was not up to the expectations of the people, and also the people in the Communist Party, right? So that old leaders, they were also not happy. So what happened, the Gorbachev attempt was failed attempt, right? And it has somehow fastened the disintegration process, right? So we can consider Gorbachev also as one of the reason, right? So what, and then if we are discussing what he did in terms of that reform, so two things are important, and they usually ask in the MCQs as well. I'm just going to highlight that. This. Okay, so basically the Petroska and the Glasnost. So basically what is it? It is basically, if it see in terms of political structure, so they have these two terms are very important, first of all, right? Petroska and Glasnost. So Petroska is you can relate with the political structure. So when we are discussing about the political structure, it's basically the restructuring of the system. Restructuring of the system is the communist system, the party system. So he has somehow made that plan to restructure that system, right? And then the Glasnost is basically the openness in the form, in the sense that in terms of economic structure, right? So that was his effort to reform the Soviet system, right? But that was somehow a failed attempt, and we will discuss why it happened, right? Okay. So, but here we were discussing about the two opinion on the reforms of Gorbachev, right? So let me just clarify this. So if you're talking about the Gorbachev, right? So if we're talking about the Gorbachev, he made some reforms. Let's just make it very clear. He made some reform. What was that reform? Petroskia and Glasnost, right? And then it's a very obvious thing that there would be some feedback or some reaction from the people, from the party, right? So even the people was not happy. If you consider people on one side, people of Soviet Union on one side, and the leaders of Communist Party on the other side, so the people was not happy. So people were not happy is because they thought that it is, they were protesting, and they thought that it is going through very slow process, right? So even if Gorbachev is making efforts, it is going in a very slow pace, right? So that's why they were not happy, right? Because they were expecting more. Gorbachev was doing his job, but they were expecting more, so that's why they were not happy. And on the other side, the leaders are already, very traditional and very conservative. So they were also not happy, and they thought that it is, very fast and it is not acceptable. So on both the side, Gorbachev feel that, have, experienced that resistance, right? So that was it. So this is the basic reason why it was a failed attempt. From his side, it was very good attempt, right? But it was somehow at that point, at that period, it was not acceptable, and that's why it has fastened the disintegration process, right? And basically, it has hastened the disintegration policy, and he was criticized by everyone. So it is one of the reason why the disintegration happened, but it is not only reason why disintegration happened, right? We have already discussed how the political and economic structure was not satisfactory, right? So economic structure was very much socialist, a very much lack of competitiveness, and the political structure was very much authoritative and lack of democratic values. So here we are discussing the different leaders, right? So basically, at the time of Russian Revolution, there was a Lenin, right, who led the Russian Revolution, right? Can you see this? So why I have highlighted this Mikhail Gorbachev, because in this chapter, most specifically, we have to focus on Mikhail Gorbachev, because his role is very prominent when we are discussing the disintegration, right? Because he somehow was responsible for disintegration, not responsible for disintegration, but he has somehow fastened, or he has somehow accelerated that disintegration, right? So that's why his role is very important. Coming to the Lenin, let's just go by chronology. So coming to the Lenin, when we are discussing about the Lenin, we have to discuss that, we have to take in mind, and you have to learn that the Lenin role was very important in the Russian Revolution, right? So starting from the 1917, right, the role of Lenin was important. So in this, you can say that he was the founder of Bolshevik Communist Party, right? So what is Communist Party? Whatever the Communist Party running at this point in the period of after 1945 to 1990s, that Communist Party was somehow founded by the Lenin. Okay, and then the Russian Revolution happened during his time, and then so somehow he was, you can see the founder of Communist Party and Russian Revolution, right? And then after him, Stalin. So in Stalin, when we are talking about Stalin, he was very tough leader. Okay, no one is tougher than he. I would say, because he was very aware what he has to do, and he was not hesitating at all to do anything, right? So that structure that become authoritative is also because of the character of Stalin also, right? Somehow we can relate that, because that authoritative character is somehow, we can say that it happened because of the Stalin and the upcoming leaders also, because they were also very stubborn and very strict about that. Only the Mikhail Gorbachev, who was very, liberal and kind of who initiated the reform. Otherwise, the Stalin, and we see the Nikita, and then Brezhnev. These are all, the leaders which, okay, so let me just, one thing I have to relate it. Let's just go by chronology first. So basically, the forcible collectivization of agriculture, that shows the strictness, right? And then the Great Terror in 1930s. So this shows that how, he has established the USSR system, and then he is somehow, establishing in a more stringent way. And then we can see the Nikita Khrushchev, right? So basically the role of Nikita Khrushchev is, if you can see here, the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Why I'm highlighting this is because I don't want you to learn everything. It's just you learn he is the founder, he has forcibly collected, and then Cuban Missile Crisis during the period of Nikita Khrushchev, and then here coming to the Brezhnev, we can discuss the the attack on Afghanistan. So okay, here it has mentioned, right? So these are the basic, although I am suggesting you to read your NCERT chapter again and again, but in case if you are not able to remember everything, then just be clear, remember at least the important points of these leaders, right? Okay, and then coming to the Gorbachev, we have already discussed how he has, the two important thing which you don't have to forget. Okay, it's not just about you have to learn it. You can't forget it, right? So it is Petroskia and Glasnost, which he has initiated, right? And then he has helped the unification of Germany. He allowed the Eastern Bloc countries to get separated from the Russia. So that happened during his time. And then this is the period. This period, can you see? This is the period of disintegration of USSR, and the Boris Yeltsin is the leader of not USSR but Russia, right? So is the first communist leader of Russia itself, right? So basically Mikhail Gorbachev is the last leader of USSR, and he is the first leader of Russia, right, after the disintegration of USSR, right? Okay, then coming to the, and we will discuss one thing also, the hardship in terms of economy, right? We will discuss the shock therapy, right? So there we will discuss that how this shock therapy happened during the time of Yeltsin, right? Because he was the leader after the Mikhail Gorbachev, right? So this is the important thing. Why we read about the leaders? We read about the leaders because so that we can connect somehow the events, right? So that's why it's very important to discuss their contribution and their timeline, right? So now we will discuss the proper chronology, what happened. So what happened in 1991? So somehow you can see that in after the 1990 unification of Germany, and then we can see the events. Here we can see the coup. What is coup? Coup is somehow the change of the protest of the people, or the military protest somehow to change the regime, right? So what happened? Military coup is basically, or the coup is basically when you are trying to change the regime altogether, right? So that is the coup. So that coup takes place in 1991. The events are very important, and that was why it was encouraged. It was encouraged due to the Communist Party hardliners, means the stricter part, right? The people who are very conservative, right? And then so it happened. Why? Against those hardliner or those people who are very stringent about their decisions and all. So basically, this coup was encouraged by the by the work or by the behavior of the hardliner communist people. And then they did not want the old style rule, right? People did not want that old style rule, because now what happened is, when Mikhail Gorbachev made the reforms, right, in terms of Glasnost and Petroskia, so somehow people have tested that the taste of freedom, right? So once they have seen the freedom, they now wanted that freedom in their lives also, right? So now their expectations were very high, so that's why they didn't want that old style system, right? And then in that phase, Boris Yeltsin has become the national figure that time. Suppose we can compare that in case of India with Jawaharlal Nehru, how after the independence Jawaharlal Nehru was a founding figure at that point, right? Because he was also very much involved in the national movement. So in the same way, Boris Yeltsin was in that coup, and he has somehow become that national hero, and that's why he became the leader after the disintegration of USSR. Before discussing this, let me just show you the map first, right? So here's the map. Can you see the USSR? This entire region is USSR, right? Can you see that? Okay. So here we are discussing Russia, this, okay? And then you can see how the pink region, Estonia, and then the Lithuania, right? These are very important, I would say. If you can't remember all 15 countries, at least read it once again and again, right? So at least you will have that in mind. If they will ask MCQs, this country, this particular states were in the former USSR, so you can somehow attempt that question, right? So read it again and again. Read all the state names, right? And then you can see how, this USSR, now coming to the point, right? So how you can see that this USSR is a combination of all 15 nations, right? So what happened after the disintegration of USSR, this countries are somehow detached from the USSR system, and now only the Russia left, right? So that we will discuss in this slide, right? So in December 1991, so you can see how, the Russia, Belarus, these are the part of USSR, the former USSR, okay, and the Russia. And then, they have come under the leadership of Yeltsin, these three countries, right? And then Soviet Union was disbanded, right? And now the other countries, we can basically call them as a Commonwealth of Independent States, right? So basically, when the disintegration happened, all countries got separated, and then they formed that Commonwealth of Independent States, right? And then we can see how one thing is important, that in this whole slide, what you have to understand is that there was 15 countries, right? And in that 15 countries, all get separated, right? And then what happened is, resources, the political resources, the economic resources, that was inherited by the Russia, right? And Russia was accepted as a successor of the Soviet Union. It was because of the region also, because the large geographical region it has. So that's why, and all the treaties which was earlier been made on the name of USSR, now the Russia taken over everything. In every sense, the Russia has succeeded the USSR, right? In economic terms, in political terms, in terms of going and signing the treaty. So everything, you can see that how, the disintegration happened. All the 15 countries separated, and the Russia got the seat as a successor of USSR, right? This we have discussed, and I recommend you to learn the name of the state, because it's a high chance that they can ask you the question that, point out which states are the part of former USSR. So this can be the question. And then we can see the, the boat which is somehow sinking, and right, and there's many, this is the cartoon you can see in your book. I have just added this image to just refreshen you. So let's just coming to the region, right? We have discussing the reasons why it happened, why the collapse happened. So we are discussing this one by one. We have already discussed some things, and we are, adding up, and we are discussing again it. So first one is the internal weakness. So the first thing is internal weaknesses. Internal weaknesses because there was only Communist Party, right? And there was also some rivalries between among the leaders also, right? And then the economic and political structure was not very much up to the expectations. What happened during the Cold War also, there was some kind of war was happening. So there was some also consequences on economic structure, right? If you are going to the war and if you are invading someone, you have to suffer that in terms of economy also. So that we can see the economic and political structure. And then we have seen the other reason was, so the first reason is internal weakness. We can see it in, we can relate it with the terms of a political structure. And coming to the economic structure, economy was somehow stagnant. Stagnant means it has stopped, or somehow it was stagnant is the sense that it was very constant, right? It was not progressing, right? And then there was also, pressure of maintaining that nuclear and military arsenals, right? So why the economy was stagnant? Because the economy was progressing, but there was a pressure of having that arsenals. Arsenals means the weapons, right? So, what happened? Somehow people have expected that if they will adopt USSR system, that will, help their economy to boost. But to the contrary, or to the opposite, what happened in reality is that the backwardness happened, right? So, and when we compare it to the USA system, that was capitalist, right? So when we compare this system to the USA system, USA economic system, it was a major political and a psychological shock, right? And why it was stagnant? One reason we have already discussed is to the pressure of maintaining that arsenals, and the other reason was the corruption also, because of the centralization, right? So suppose in India also, if someone will have the power for more than 15 or 20 years, the corruption is a very obvious thing, right? And the same way, you can see how during entire from 1945 to 1919, we have seen only 5 leaders, right? So it shows that for how long time they were having that power position. So that's why corruption was there. And there was no accountability, because every decisions were made by the government, right? They have to decide that what they should give or they should not give. They have to see everything. So that's why there was stagnant in terms of economy. There was corruption, there was pressure of maintaining nuclear and military arsenals, and there was internal weakness in terms of political structure. These are all the reasons, and we will discuss all other reasons as well. But in this slide, we can see these 3 basic reasons. And then the 4th reason is, we have here is Gorbachev. As I have told you that he is also one of the reason of the disintegration of USSR. Why? Because from his side, he was very liberal. He tried to make reform, right? But somehow people were not satisfied, because they thought that it's a very slow process. Their expectations was very high, and the leaders were of course will not be happy, because he was somehow breaking their old structure, right? So that was the reason why his attempt was failed. Right, so you can see we have discussed this already, that how the section of society, they believe that it is very slow pace, and on the other hand the leaders having that image that it's a somehow too quickly, and it's a tug of war. Tug of war means there was a rivalry among the leaders, among the Communist Party, like between the conservative leaders and the Mikhail Gorbachev, right? So there was a tug of war, how someone can do something for some people, right? He somehow, damaging the system. So that arrogance, that tug of war was going on, right? And there was also one reason. So this is the fourth reason. And coming to the fifth reason is the rise of nationalism. What is nationalism? Nationalism is a feeling to have your own nation, right? So basically, nationalism feeling was coming from all the 15 nations, or if you can just exclude the Russia, because Russia already succeeded the USSR, it was coming from all the 15 nations, right? All the 40 nations, right? So basically, the fifth reason you can see is the nationalism, right? The desire for the sovereignty and having your own independence, having your own control on your region. So that was the reason. So basically the Baltic region. Okay, one thing you can, when you are reading about or you are learning about the 15 nations, you can just relate it to the Baltic nation, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Okay, and the Ukraine, Georgia, and the other. So maybe this can help you to remember, but somehow I'm suggesting you to learn that the name of all that 15 nations. If you can't learn that, at least have that understanding. If they ask कि कौन सा है इसमें से the part of former USSR, so you can mark it, right? So this is the timeline of disintegration of Soviet Union. Basically, it's a fact-based thing, and you have to learn it, right? But let me just, for your understanding only, let me just discuss it, right? So what happened in 1985? Okay, so what is happening in 1985? Mikhail Gorbachev, he became the General Secretary, right? Okay, so one thing I forgot to tell is that in Russia, the leader, in USSR, the leader were called as General Secretary, right? So that clarity is also very important, right? So he elected as a General Secretary of the Communist Party, right? And then he initiated the reforms from 1985 onwards, right? And then in 1988, we can see that independence movement from Baltic region, one of the Baltic region, Lithuania. So basically, in 1988, you can see the Baltic regions, they started the independence movement. And then the Warsaw Pact members. You know what is Warsaw Pact? We have discussed in first chapter also. There was, on one side, there was a NATO of the USSR. It's a military alliance. And on the other hand, there was a Warsaw. Okay, Warsaw from the USSR. Right. So that we have discussed. So the members of that Warsaw Pact, they also, declared that they will decide their own future. So when it happened in 1989. Okay. And then Gorbachev, you can see that in 1990, Gorbachev strips the Soviet Communist Party monopoly on power of calling Soviet parliament to permit the multi-party system. So basically what happened in 1990, multi-party. So he has also initiated the multi-party politics, right, which was restricted before him. There was only one party, Communist Party, right? So, if you see the difference, Communist Party somehow, we have no choice. Like if we compare with India, there was proper election going on, right? And then the Nehru and the Congress was elected, but there was no multi-party system, one party system. And then that multi-party system when it started 1990. So this is the timeline. You should, read it once, and then you will be clarified with this. In 1990, Lithuania became the first country. Okay, so this one is very important. Which country or which nation state has become the first to declare the independence, right? So it is Lithuania. Okay, and then you can see that the Russian parliament declared independence, and then the Yeltsin become the president of Russia. So this is the timeline, right? And then in 1991, the Baltic region, they have joined the UNO, right? Okay, and then the Communist Party headline, there was a coup. We have discussed the military coup in 1991, and then this Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, they decided to have that annual treaty. We have discussed how, the Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine came under the Yeltsin. It's because they have decided to have that treaty, annual treaty, on the name of Commonwealth of Independence. Right, and then the other nation, they are also getting independence. So this is the timeline. Read it once, and I'm suggesting you to read your NCRT as many times as possible if you really want to attempt all questions, right? Because you can't escape it. You have to read it again and again, right? And then coming to the consequences, what happened after the disintegration, we have discussed the causes of the or the reason of the disintegration. Now we are discussing what happened. Consequences means the results of disintegration, right? So basically, we have discussed in the Cold War period the ideological disputes between the USA and USSR. So that ideological disputes no longer there. That was the first consequence. There was no arm race because now the unipolar world established. Bipolarity ended. Disintegration of USSR happened. So no rivalry, only unipolar world, that is USA. And what happened after the unipolar world, that we will discuss in next chapter. Okay. And then the second is, we can see that for the countries, right? So the power relation changed. So second, you can see the power relation, the world politics changed, right? So two option left, right? Either for the world to become either the multipolar or the unipolar. So, but in case if we see the chronology after the disintegration of USSR, the world became unipolar, but soon after that, the other countries also started getting emerged. And right now, in this context, in the present time, we have multipolar world. Right, because the Russia is also emerging, and also the China is rising, India is rising. India is also a major power. So that multi-power structure you can see right now. This we will discuss in next chapter, unipolar world. Right. So one thing you have to learn is that no ideological dispute, power relation changed, right, and then emergence of many new countries, right? So what happened during the Cold War period is that the countries were somehow aligning with the USA or the USSR. There was only NAM which had their independent status. Otherwise, every nation was in the favor of either USA or the USSR. So that structure changed, and that's why many new countries emerged, right? And their interest was also their identity issues that emerged. So this is the consequence. Okay, coming to the most important thing, what is shock therapy? Shock therapy, we have discussing in the previous slides that when we compare the USSR system with USA in terms of economy, that was a political and psychological shock. Because the USSR people, right, the people of USSR have expected that if they will adopt the socialist system, they will have that vibrant economy. But contrary to that, what happened, the economy was very stagnant, and it was because there was no competition. If there is no competition, if there is no merit system, people will not work, right? It's a natural tendency of the people. If you are getting everything in your hand, you will not work. So the same thing happened in USSR also. Government was giving subsidized facilities to everyone, despite they are doing the work or not, and that's the reason why the economy was very much stagnant, right? So what happened after the disintegration or during that process, that the political leaders, they have decided, they were very much aware that social system is not working, right? So what they decided is that they will make a transition from the socialist to capitalist, right? So that transition was okay. In fact, the China has also made that transition. China is although a communist country, but capitalist system is there. So that transition was okay, but that transition was very sudden and very drastic, right? The sudden drastic transition is what came to known as shock therapy, right? It was a shock. kind of. And this term is very important. They ask a question about it. What is shock therapy, kind of. So you can see that they have somehow transitioning there, making the transition from socialist system to the democratic capitalist system. So they were shifting their system from socialist to democratic capitalist system, but it was very sudden, dramatic, drastic. Okay, and that is the reason why it was came as a shock therapy, right? So what happened? People expected that if they will make a transition from the socialist to capitalist, everything will be shot out, but that not happened because it was very sudden. So the negative consequences happened. What happened? So basically, what they expected that everything will be fine, not happened, and we will discuss in next slide how the many key industries that was in the auction, right? And the Soviet economy was somehow, which was saved by the socialist system, was just dissolved in a minute, right? Because it was a shock. It was very sudden, na? If it would have gone in a very gradual process, in a one by one, okay, we will shift in a very gradual way, then it would have some other consequences, but because it was very sudden, so that consequences happened. So what is shock therapy? Shock therapy is that that transition, that sudden transition from socialist to capitalist. And what it involved? It involved basically, if we are talking about the democratic capitalist, privatization of all properties, right? So earlier in the USSR system there was no privatization, there was centralization, right? So privatization of property, and then the emergence of private firms, the competitive natures, right? And the financial opening up, currency convertibility easily from dollar to this and that, right? And then the drastic change in the trade alliance. Trade alliance means that now they have changed the partners to which they used to have their trade relations, right? So this was all about the shock therapy, and now in the next slide we will discuss the consequences of shock therapy. And also in this slide, okay, before going to the consequences, we will discuss what is shock therapy for the post-communist regime, right? So when we are talking about the post-communist regime, let it be very clear, communist regime is USSR. So post-communist regime is all the 15 nations which are not either part or not part of USSR, but somehow we can call it post-communist regime, right? Because earlier they were the part of communist system. So right. So when we are talking about the post-communist regime, what happened there? So there was a shift. First thing we have discussed, from socialist to capitalist, this capitalist economy, which means that completely rooting out the socialist system. Sudden transition, completely rooting out. Everything we have changed. Sudden. Right? And then this transition was very painful because, people need some time to digest that. People need some time to, to think about that. Okay, we were in the social system and now we have to be that competitive. So people didn't digest it correctly. Right? They were not able to process that. And that's why it was very painful, right, for all the nations, because the collective farms, where the people are getting subsidized things, where the people have not to work to that expectations, and now to the private farming, where they have to work and everything would be decided by the merit, by their work. So that was very painful, right? And you can see how the development was envisaged, that the trade and the sudden shock therapy was a drastic change. So we have basically hoped that the openness, FDI in economy are now essentials. So what is FDI? FDI is foreign direct investment. So basically during the socialist period, when you're talking about the socialist system, even in our country there was a system of restricting or raising the trade barriers at the borders to rescue or to save your domestic economy, right? So that was not during the USSR period, but now the FDI also invited, and then the openness in economy, right? And then finally the breakup from the existing trade reliance. So basically, when Soviet bloc was having their relations with the countries, with the regions which are somehow collectivist centralized, but now they have to go to the system which is capitalist, which is following the capitalist system, believe in FDI. So this was the proper transition from existing trade alliance to finding the new one, right? So this was the case in entire post-communist regime, all the 15 nations, right? In case of Russia started evolving in 2000, right? 10 years after the independence. In 1990s, Russia also faced the consequences, but by the 2000, they started reviving, right? And the reason for their revival is natural resources, right? Natural gas. Okay. But in the other countries, so also the Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and these countries which are the oil and gas producer, they have reformed because of their resources, right? So basically the shock therapy, we will discuss the consequences, and what happened after 10 years is that they have somehow revived, right? You will understand this. First you have to understand the consequences. So let me just take you to the next slide, the consequences of shock therapy, right? So basically, when we are discussing about the USSR is basically the European and Middle East country, right? So basically, the Middle East country have their oil refineries, right? They have oil resources. But at that point, you can see that the Arab Spring. So coming to the consequences of shock therapy, we have discussed how, it was a drastic change. So the economy was totally disturbed. It was painful transition. And then we have discussed how after 10 years, Russia and the other countries which have their oil resources, they have evolved somehow, right? But what happened in 2009, around 2009, that the Arab Spring, basically it happened in the Middle East countries, that they started protesting against the government, right? So that was the rebellion against the government. And then one thing which is important from your MCQ point of view is Tunisia, right? So where the first it began, it was in Tunisia, right? And then what was this? The Arab Spring is basically the dissatisfaction of people towards the government, right? So basically the protest against the government, right? So you can see how the shock therapy, that was the economic consequences which we have from the USSR disintegration. And then we can see how the countries are reviving somehow. But then we also see that chronology, how the different the people were not happy, and you can see the protest from everywhere, right? So this was the shock therapy, and it somehow we consider the consequences of shock therapy. It is because of that chronology that is coming from the socialist regime, that is stagnant economy, and then finally we can see this protest against the government, right? So these are the consequences of shock therapy. So coming to the post Cold War phase, when we are discussing about the India relation with with Russia and the other nations. With Russia, we have a very good relation, right? We are all-time friend, and we have we also know that in 1971, during the Cold War period, we have signed a friendship treaty with Russia. Okay, and then also after the disintegration of USSR, we have maintained a good relation with Russia as well, right? And then also on the issue of Kashmir, right, India have got the benefits from the Russia, and also we take some energy supplies and all thing from Russia, right? With the post USSR regimes, like the other countries except the Russia, we also have maintained a good relation with those countries in terms of energy resources, and also to have our good national interest, right? So in the present context also, when we have seen the Russia-Ukraine war, we can see how the India has made that independent decision, that is strategic autonomy, that we are not we are not opposing and we are not supporting anyone, right? So our attempt, our stand is very clear that we have maintained a good relation even after the disintegration of USSR with Russia and the other nations, right? Okay. So this is the end of this chapter, and we have discussed how, the US, we have in the last chapter discussed US and USSR, and there we have discussed the USSR, why and how it was disintegrated, and the next chapter, in the next succeeding chapter, we will discussing the unipolar world, the regime of USA, right, the other world. Thank you.